Welcome back. I'm in the green room again, and this time I have Amy Cheng, who did a wonderful talk this morning about machine learning and art in JavaScript, which is kind of unexpected sometimes when it comes to machine learning. Mm-hmm. And you talked about some experiments that you did with art and maybe a certain really cute dog called Ice. Can you tell us a bit more about what you were doing?
Okay, so Ice the dog is a colleague's dog who happens to be super photogenic, and she gave me permission to use her dog in the presentation. So a lot of the experiments I've done with machine learning is just basically setting up my development environment to run Python and figuring out the right mix of JavaScript libraries to get started, which is not too dissimilar to like when I started doing oil painting earlier this year. A lot of it wasn't just, oh, I'm going to paint this person on canvas. A lot of it is spending like almost half of a 3-hour class mixing the colors and trying to sort of get familiar with how the medium works, like just understanding my tools so I can like accomplish what I want with them, which is not too dissimilar to when you start out with programming, understanding sort of how your code editor works, how the command line works, how GitHub works, and just like all this kind of yak shaving before you actually start doing coding, before you actually start painting. It's just like understanding your tools and how to work with them. So most of the time spent with machine learning is just understanding how the development environment is set up and all the libraries that are needed to run the machine learning tasks.
I really appreciated those parallels because I know nothing about art and I was really bad at art in school, so I stopped taking art. So I really, really liked that you said it's more of a process rather than you just immediately become really good at machine learning and make amazing pieces of artwork and things like that. I really appreciated that.
Yeah, learning how to make art is definitely a process, and no one really tells you how long that process is. There's a funny anecdote with Picasso where a woman asked him to do a drawing, and he just did a 6-minute drawing, and the woman was outraged, and she was like, and Picasso was like, well, no, it took me an entire lifetime to make this drawing, so that's why I'm charging you an outrageous price for it.
Sorry, the mic is screwing up. So I will get Aaron to cut that last bit out where you're just awkwardly staring at me looking at my mic, but cool. So can you also tell me a bit about, you touched on this concept known as the machine learning aura and how like maybe we're trying too hard to replicate human art accurately with machine learning and we should be more trying to get the aura of machine learning art to emerge? Can you expand a bit on that? Because I thought that was super interesting.
Sure. So in the essay that I referenced in my talk, written by Walter Benjamin, he doesn't really go into exactly what aura means. He kind of just leaves it to the reader, but he does allude that the aura consists of the historical context that an artwork is made, the materials, the live presence of the artwork. Because art isn't created in a vacuum. There's history to it. The artist has their own biography that affects what they're creating. And with machine learning, it's the same. Right? There's a whole history of using computers to create art, whole history of machine learning. Where do these algorithms originate? And so when I think about machine learning aura, I think about the deep dream experiments. Mm-hmm. So there was a blog post written by some AI researchers at Google where they basically trained a convolutional neural network kind of on itself. So they created this introspection tool, and it basically just kind of watched a convolutional neural network classify images, trying to understand the data set of all these images. And what came out was just like really trippy pictures of many eyes, weird dog faces. And I found that really interesting. And I was like, this is pretty representative of the machine learning aura, because the machine learning sort of app doesn't see its subject the way they do. They kind of detect features, they detect blobs, and the deep dream experiments just kind of like laid that out.
Yeah, I remember for a while everyone was turning their like profile pictures on social media into like the deep dream versions of themselves. It was really spooky and creepy and cool.
I mean, the reason why there were many eyes in these deep dream experiments is because a lot of the training data was just of things with eyes in them, and for some reason the math just kind of fixated on these eyes, and that's why all of these images were so trippy, because of their eyes. Yeah. And it really says more about the training data than it does about the machine. Like, why does our training data look like this that would lead to these kind of aesthetics?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm wondering if eyes are like one of the most consistent parts of a face or the most distinctive in contrast, and maybe the feature detection is just easier. And that's like totally just like throwing wild guesses out there, but I guess sometimes we won't necessarily know why that happens.
Yeah, all you can really do is just try different training data and different algorithms and different kind of like ways to do computer vision, because a lot of the art made with machine learning goes back to computer vision, because as I mentioned in the talk, the authors of the style transfer paper used a neural network that was trained to classify images and not recreate images.
So that makes a lot of sense, and I think that I would definitely want to read some of the references that you put in your talk, so thank you for sharing them. But I sort of want to know also, like, what got you to this point where you're giving talks and sharing references about machine learning? What sort of resources were helpful to you when you got into it, and what made you want to explore this topic?
So I've always been interested in using code to make art, and we're at this stage of our kind of culture where we are kind of learning from the mistakes from Web 2.0, where people are like, hey, maybe we should think more critically about machine learning, not just be totally entranced by the technology. And the people who are doing this are artists. So in New York City, there's a very vibrant code art scene, and a lot of it is focused at NYU ITP, which is where P5.js, which is this creative coding JavaScript framework that I mentioned in my talk, where it was kind of created by Lauren McCarthy. And she set out, well, P5.js is kind of like the ancestor to processing, which was a programming language designed specifically to turn coders into artists and artists into coders. So I'm relying very heavily on this community to help me get started.
I think that's what's awesome about this, is whenever something reaches a certain critical mass of interest, people are always going to try and include communities that might have missed out on the first round of this. And I think that what you said about being able to be critical of this new technology, being able to have people who traditionally wouldn't get a voice to, or even like the right opportunity to explore this stuff, is really important. I really like that ethics has definitely featured pretty heavily in this particular conference as well. And I think that your talk was really important to kind of touch on this from an artist perspective. I don't think that artists are the first community that people think of with machine learning, but it's really, really important. So I'm really glad that you shared that. Are there any sort of people in the artist community that you think people should be following when it comes to this kind of ML stuff, just from the sort of spaces that you've been exploring?
Yeah, sure. Gene Kogan is sort of an ML artist, and I've taken like a couple of workshops, and he's kind of created this online book called Machine Learning for Artists, and he really breaks down the concepts, but through an artist perspective. And he's going around giving workshops. Yeah, but if you really want to learn about machine learning from a beginner's perspective, I definitely recommend artists, because artists usually just have to do it on their own when it comes to technology, because most of the resources out there when it comes to learn how to code is just for like people who want to do it for business reasons and not for fun. And so yeah, definitely. Artists are definitely, and art has always kind of been political and educational, and most artists out there are also educators, so they know what it means to be a beginner.
That's super cool. Well, I feel like you definitely found a really nice community in machine learning. Thank you so much for joining me in the green room today to talk about
Thanks for having me.